My name is Nathan Hayes. I just turned 18, and I thought becoming an adult meant freedom. Instead, it meant finally being old enough to see my family for who they really were. The phone call came at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning in late September, jolting me awake from the kind of deep sleep that only happens when you're 18 and think you're invincible. It was my mom, and her voice had that particular tone that meant someone was dying. "Nathan, you need to come home. Grandpa's taken a turn for the worse." I was 3 hours into my freshman year at State University, living in Patterson Hall with my roommate Marcus, trying to figure out college life and independence. The past 3 weeks had been everything I'd hoped for. Freedom from family drama, new friends who didn't know my history, professors who treated me like an adult, and the intoxicating feeling of making my own decisions for the first time in my life. But Grandpa was dying, so I packed a bag and drove home. Grandpa William Hayes was 84 years old and had been battling lung cancer for the past year and a half. The cancer was aggressive and had spread despite multiple rounds of chemotherapy and radiation. For the past 6 months, he had been in hospice care, which meant the doctors had given up on treating the cancer and were just trying to keep him comfortable until the end. He was staying in the house where he had lived for 43 years, the same house where my dad and his siblings had grown up, the same house where I had spent countless weekends and holidays throughout my childhood. It was a large colonial on 2 acres of land in one of the nicer neighborhoods in town, with a swimming pool and a 3-car garage and enough space for the whole extended family to gather for birthdays and holidays. Grandpa had built his wealth slowly and methodically over the course of his adult life. He had started as a mechanic after returning from Korea in the early 1950s, but he had always been smart with money and business. He opened his own auto repair shop in 1962, expanded into a chain of 3 shops by 1975, and then sold the business in 1992 for what everyone in the family knew was a substantial amount of money. He had also invested in real estate, buying rental properties throughout the 1980s and 1990s when prices were low. By the time I was old enough to understand money, everyone in the family knew that Grandpa was wealthy, probably worth several $1,000,000 between his business sale, his real estate holdings, his stock portfolio, and his pension. But Grandpa had always been private about his exact net worth, and he had never talked about what would happen to his money when he died. This had been a source of speculation and tension in the family for as long as I could remember. My dad, Robert Hayes, was the oldest of 3 children and had always assumed that he would inherit the largest portion of Grandpa's estate. Dad worked as a middle manager at an insurance company and had never been particularly successful financially, so the prospect of a large inheritance was something he had been counting on for years. My Aunt Lisa was the middle child and had married a doctor, so money was less of an issue for her family. But she had always been competitive with my dad, and she definitely expected to receive her fair share of Grandpa's wealth. My Uncle Mark was the youngest and had struggled with addiction and financial problems for most of his adult life. He had been in and out of rehab multiple times, had filed for bankruptcy twice, and was currently living in a small apartment and working part-time at a hardware store. The family had always assumed that Grandpa would leave him something, but probably not as much as Dad and Lisa because of his history of poor financial decisions. The point is, everyone in my family had spent years thinking about Grandpa's money and what they would do with their share when he died. Everyone except me, because I was the grandson, and it had never occurred to me that I might inherit anything significant. When I arrived at Grandpa's house, the first thing I noticed was how many cars were in the driveway. Dad's car, Aunt Lisa's car, Uncle Mark's car, and several cars I didn't recognize that probably belonged to my adult cousins who lived in other states. The second thing I noticed was the sound of voices coming from the dining room. Not the quiet, respectful voices you might expect in a house where someone was dying, but the animated, business-like voices of people having an important meeting. I walked into the house through the front door, which was unlocked, and called out to announce that I was there. "Nathan!" Mom appeared from the kitchen, looking stressed and tired. "I'm so glad you're here. How was the drive?" "Fine. How's Grandpa?" He's not doing well, honey. The hospice nurse says it could be any time now." "Is he awake? Can I see him?" "He's been sleeping most of the day, but you can go up and check on him. He's in his bedroom." "What's happening in the dining room?" Mom's expression became uncomfortable. "The family is having a meeting about arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" "Funeral arrangements and other things." I could hear Uncle Mark's voice from the dining room, saying something about liquid assets and tax implications. This didn't sound like a conversation about funeral arrangements. Are they talking about his will? "Nathan, this is adult business. Why don't you go upstairs and spend some time with Grandpa?" This was the kind of response I had been getting my entire life whenever family financial matters came up. I was the kid, so I wasn't included in discussions about money or inheritance or family business. But I was 18 now, legally an adult, and if the family was having meetings about Grandpa's estate, I thought I had a right to know what was being discussed. Instead of arguing with Mom, I decided to go upstairs and see Grandpa first. I could deal with family politics later. Grandpa's bedroom was on the second floor at the end of the hallway, and as I walked toward it, I could hear the conversation from the dining room more clearly. They were definitely not talking about funeral arrangements. "The real estate alone has to be worth at least $2 million, Dad was saying. "But what about the tax implications of inheriting rental properties?" Aunt Lisa's voice. "We'll have to sell some of them immediately to pay the estate taxes." Someone else said, I think it was my cousin Jennifer, Aunt Lisa's daughter, who was an accountant. "What about the business sale money? How much of that is left?" Uncle Mark's voice. "According to his financial advisor, probably around $800,000 in that account, plus whatever's in his stock portfolio." Dad again. I stopped walking and stood in the hallway, listening to my family discuss Grandpa's wealth like he was already dead and they were dividing up his possessions. "So we're looking at maybe $3 to $4 million total?" Aunt Lisa. "Could be more. He's always been secretive about his investments." Dad. "The important thing is that we have a plan for how to divide everything fairly." Jennifer. "What's fair?" Uncle Mark, sounding defensive. "Equal three-way split. Or does Robert get more because he's been helping Dad with his finances?" "I think equal three-way split is fairest." Aunt Lisa. "We're all his children, but Mark hasn't exactly been responsible with money in the past." Dad. "Maybe his share should go into a trust or something." "That's not fair." Uncle Mark. "I've been clean for 3 years, and I deserve the same consideration as anyone else." "Nobody's saying you don't deserve consideration, Mark. We're just trying to be practical about this." I felt sick listening to them argue about Grandpa's money while he was literally dying upstairs. It was like they had forgotten that he was still alive, still conscious sometimes, still able to hear what was going on in his own house. I continued down the hallway to his bedroom and knocked softly on the door before going in. Grandpa was awake, lying in his hospital bed with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He looked smaller and frilier than I had ever seen him, but his eyes were alert and focused when he turned to look at me. "Nathan," he said, and his voice was weak but clear. "You came home." "Of course I came home, Grandpa. How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying," he said with a slight smile. "Which I suppose I am." "Are you in pain?" "The morphine helps." "Sit down, talk to me." I pulled a chair up next to his bed and sat down. The contrast between this quiet, peaceful room and the animated business meeting happening downstairs was striking. "How's college?" he asked. "It's good. I like my classes, and my roommate is cool. I'm studying business administration." "That's good. You always were the smart one in the family." "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything, Nathan." "Can you hear what's going on downstairs?" His expression changed, and he looked sad in a way that broke my heart. "I can hear some of it. They think I'm unconscious most of the time, so they don't bother to keep their voices down. It must be hard to listen to them talking about your money like that. Nathan, I need to tell you something important, but you have to promise me you won't say anything to the rest of the family until after I'm gone." "What is it? Though will they think they know about isn't my real will?" This was not what I had expected him to say. "What do you mean?" "I wrote a new will 6 months ago, after I realized how my children were going to react to my death. I've been listening to them talk about my money for the past year, and I've seen how they treat this whole situation like they're waiting for me to die so they can get rich." "So what does the new will say?" "Most of my estate is going to charity. The children will each get $50,000, which is enough to help them, but not enough to make them wealthy. The house and the rental properties are going to be sold, and the proceeds are going to fund a scholarship program at the community college." I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. "But there's something else, Nathan. Something I need you to know." "What?" "You're getting $1 million. The room started spinning, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. "What?" "You're the only person in this family who has ever cared about me as a person instead of as a source of money. You're the only one who visits me because you want to spend time with me, not because you're hoping to stay in my good graces for inheritance purposes." "Grandpa, I don't need your money." "I know you don't need it. That's exactly why you're getting it. But the rest of the family is going to be furious. The rest of the family is going to learn that relationships matter more than money. When are you going to tell them?" "I'm not. You are after I'm dead. The lawyer has instructions to read the will 1 week after my funeral." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I wanted you to know that someone in this family sees your worth and wants to invest in your future. And because I need you to understand why I made the decisions I made." We talked for another hour about his reasons for changing the will and what he hoped I would do with the money. He wanted me to finish college without worrying about student loans, and he wanted me to have the freedom to choose a career based on what I was passionate about rather than what would pay the bills. Money can be a tool for good or a source of corruption, he told me. "I've watched what the prospect of inheriting money has done to my children, and I don't like what I see." "What do you mean?" "Your father used to call me every Sunday just to chat. Now he calls me every Sunday to ask about my health and my finances. Your Aunt Lisa used to bring her children to visit me once a month. Now she comes to visit me twice a week and spends most of the time asking about my investments and my estate planning." "What about Uncle Mark?" "Mark is the most honest about it. He admits that he needs money, and he asks me directly for help. I respect that more than the others pretending they're visiting out of love when they're really visiting out of greed." "Is that why you're giving him the same amount as Dad and Aunt Lisa?" "That's exactly why. Mark has made mistakes with money, but he's never lied to me about his motivations." As we were talking, I could still hear the voices from downstairs, still discussing estate planning and tax strategies and how to maximize the value of Grandpa's assets. "Do you want me to go tell them to stop?" I asked. "No. Let them plan. Let them think they know what's going to happen. It will make the lesson more powerful when they learn the truth." "What lesson?" "That relationships are more valuable than money, and that treating someone like a bank account instead of a human being has consequences." Around 8 o'clock that evening, the family meeting downstairs broke up, and everyone came upstairs to spend time with Grandpa before going home. But their visits were brief and perfunctory. quick conversations about how he was feeling, promises to come back tomorrow, and reminders that they loved him. Nobody stayed to actually talk with him or spend meaningful time with him. They had done their duty by visiting, and now they could go home and continue planning how to divide up his estate. After everyone left, I stayed. Mom tried to convince me to go home and get some rest, but I told her I wanted to spend the night at Grandpa's house in case he needed anything. "The hospice nurse will be here," she said. "You don't need to stay." "I want to stay." "Nathan, this isn't your responsibility." "I'm not staying because it's my responsibility. I'm staying because I want to be here." Mom looked confused by this concept. The idea that someone would stay with Grandpa because they wanted to, rather than because they felt obligated to. That night, I slept in the guest room next to Grandpa's bedroom, and I woke up several times to check on him. The hospice nurse, a kind woman named Carol, was amazed that I was there. "Most families don't have young people who are willing to stay overnight," she told me. "Your grandfather is lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have him. He talks about you a lot. You're clearly very special to him." "He's special to me too." The next morning, Dad called to check on Grandpa's condition, and when he found out I had spent the night, he seemed surprised. "You didn't have to do that, Nathan. We're paying for professional care." "I know, I didn't have to do it." "Well, I hope it didn't interfere with your studies." "Dad, it's Wednesday. I don't have classes until tomorrow." "Still, you should be focusing on college, not on family obligations." "It's not an obligation." "What do you mean?" "I mean I stayed because I wanted to spend time with Grandpa, not because I felt like I had to." "That's very mature of you, son." But I could tell that Dad didn't really understand why I would choose to spend time with a dying person if I didn't have to. Over the next 3 days, I split my time between staying with Grandpa and listening to the ongoing family discussions about estate planning. The conversations were becoming more detailed and more specific, with people starting to make concrete plans about what they would do with their anticipated inheritances. Dad was talking about paying off the mortgage on our house and maybe buying a new car. Aunt Lisa was talking about renovating her kitchen and taking a family vacation to Europe. Uncle Mark was talking about getting his own apartment and maybe going back to school to learn a trade. My cousins were making plans too. Jennifer was talking about starting her own accounting practice. My cousin David was talking about making a down payment on a house. Everyone had specific ideas about how they were going to use Grandpa's money to improve their lives. Meanwhile, Grandpa was getting weaker every day. He was awake less often, and when he was awake, he was sometimes confused about where he was or what was happening. But during his lucid moments, he was still sharp and aware of what was going on around him. "Are they still making their plans?" he asked me on Thursday afternoon. "Yeah, Dad thinks he's going to pay off the house." "What do you think about that?" "I think it's weird that everyone is making spending plans before you're even dead." "It is weird, isn't it? But it's also human nature. People have a hard time separating love from money." "Is that why you changed your will?" "Partly, but mostly I changed it because I realized that leaving my children a lot of money wouldn't actually make their lives better." "What do you mean?" "Nathan, your father makes a decent living at his insurance job. Your Aunt Lisa is married to a doctor. They don't need my money to live comfortably. They want my money because they think it will make them happy. And you don't think it will?" "I think it will make them comfortable, but I don't think it will make them happy. And I think it might make them lazy." "What about Uncle Mark? He actually does need money." "Mark needs help, not money. He needs job training and counseling and support to stay clean. He doesn't need a lump sum of cash that he might spend poorly and then have nothing left." "So you think giving him $50,000 is better than giving him $200,000? "I think giving him $50,000 plus encouraging him to get the help he needs is better than giving him $200,000 with no strings attached. And the charities you're giving them money to? The scholarship fund will help young people get education and job training. The food bank will help families who are actually struggling to survive. The Cancer Research Foundation might help find treatments that could save other people's lives. That makes sense. Nathan, I've been wealthy for 30 years, and I've learned that money is only valuable if you use it to create something meaningful. Hoarding money doesn't make you happy, and spending money on luxuries doesn't make you happy. Using money to help other people and to build something lasting, that's what makes money worthwhile. Is that why you're giving me so much? I'm giving you money because I believe you'll use it wisely. You're 18 years old, and you're already more mature and thoughtful than most of the adults in this family. How can you be sure I won't waste it? Because you're the only person who didn't ask me for it. That evening, the family had another meeting in the dining room. This time, they were discussing more practical matters like funeral arrangements and who would be responsible for cleaning out Grandpa's house after he died. We should probably have the house appraised so we know what it's worth, Aunt Lisa said. And we'll need to figure out what to do with his personal belongings, Dad added. Some of the furniture is probably valuable, Jennifer said, especially the antique pieces. We should have an estate sale for anything we don't want to keep, Uncle Mark suggested. Or we could divide up the valuable items among ourselves, Dad said. I was sitting in the kitchen, supposedly doing homework, but actually listening to them plan how to dispose of Grandpa's possessions like he was already dead. The conversation continued for over an hour, covering everything from which funeral home to use, to who would write Grandpa's obituary, to how to notify his financial advisors and lawyers about his death. Has anyone talked to him about his will recently? Aunt Lisa asked. I tried to bring it up last month, but he just said everything was taken care of, Dad replied. Do we know who his lawyer is? Jennifer asked. Richard Coleman downtown. He's been handling Dad's legal work for years, Dad said. Should someone call him to let him know about Dad's condition? Uncle Mark asked. I think the lawyer will contact us after Dad passes. That's usually how it works, Jennifer said. I just hope everything is straightforward, Aunt Lisa said. I don't want any surprises or complications. Dad's always been organized about his finances. I'm sure everything will be fine, Dad said. If only they knew what was coming. Friday morning, Grandpa took a turn for the worse. Carol, the hospice nurse, said that his breathing had become more labored during the night, and that he was probably entering the final stage of his illness. How much time does he have? Mom asked. It's hard to say exactly, but probably not more than a day or two, Carol replied. Mom called Dad and his siblings to let them know, and within an hour, the house was full of family members again. But this time, instead of having business meetings in the dining room, they were all upstairs crowding around Grandpa's bedroom. The problem was that there were too many people, and they were all talking at once, and the room felt chaotic and overwhelming. Grandpa was barely conscious, but I could see that all the noise and activity was disturbing him. Maybe we should take turns visiting him, I suggested, so it's not so crowded in here. We want to be here when he passes, Aunt Lisa said. We don't want him to be alone. But he's not alone if 1 or 2 people are with him. He doesn't need 8 people in the room at the same time. Nathan, this is an adult decision, Dad said. We know what's best. How is it an adult decision? I'm an adult, and I think having 8 people talking loudly in a dying person's room is not what's best for the dying person. Don't be disrespectful, Mom said. I'm not being disrespectful. I'm trying to make sure Grandpa is comfortable. We're all trying to make sure he's comfortable, Aunt Lisa said. But they weren't. They were trying to make sure they were present when he died, which is different from making sure he was comfortable while he was dying. The standoff continued for several minutes, with me arguing that they should be more considerate of Grandpa's comfort and them arguing that they had a right to be there for his final moments. Finally, Grandpa himself resolved the issue by opening his eyes and speaking in a voice that was weak but clear. "Too many people," he said. "Nathan stays. Everyone else, please go downstairs." The family looked shocked that Grandpa had expressed a preference, and even more shocked that his preference was for me to stay rather than his own children. "Dad, we want to be here with you," Dad said. "You can be here, downstairs. Send people up one at a time if you want to say goodbye. But what if it happens while we're downstairs?" Aunt Lisa asked. "Then Nathan will come get you." There was an uncomfortable silence as everyone processed the fact that Grandpa had chosen his 18-year-old grandson to be with him during his final hours instead of his own children. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" Dad asked. "I'm sure." Reluctantly, everyone left the room except for me and Carol, the hospice nurse. "Thank you," Grandpa said once we were alone. "For what?" "For caring more about my comfort than about being seen as the good grandson who was present when I died. I do want to be here when you die, Grandpa, but I want to be here because you want me here, not because I think it makes me look good. That's the difference between you and them, Nathan. You think about what I want. They think about what they want." Over the next several hours, family members came upstairs 1 or 2 at a time to spend a few minutes with Grandpa. Some of the visits were genuinely touching. People sharing memories, expressing love, asking for forgiveness for old arguments. But some of the visits were clearly motivated by guilt or obligation rather than genuine emotion. People saying things they thought they were supposed to say, going through the motions of a deathbed reconciliation without any real feeling behind it. Grandpa was mostly unconscious by this point, but I could tell he was still aware of what was happening around him. "Can you hear them?" I asked him during one of his lucid moments. "Some of it," he whispered. "How do you feel about the things they're saying?" "Some of them mean it. Some of them are just checking a box." "How can you tell the difference?" "You can always tell the difference, Nathan. People who love you show it in how they treat you when you're healthy, not just in what they say when you're dying." "Is that why you changed your will?" "That's exactly why." Around 10 o'clock that night, most of the family went home, promising to come back first thing in the morning. Only Mom and Dad stayed in the house, sleeping in the guest rooms. I stayed in Grandpa's room, dozing in the chair next to his bed. Carol had set up a cot in the corner where she could rest, but still monitor his condition. At 3:47 a.m., Grandpa's breathing changed. It became more shallow and irregular, and Carol quietly told me that the end was probably very close. "Should I wake up Mom and Dad?" I asked. "Let me check his vital signs first," she said. But Grandpa opened his eyes and looked directly at me. "Nathan." "I'm here, Grandpa." "Don't wake them up yet. I want to talk to you first." "What do you want to talk about?" "I want you to know that you've been the best part of my family for the past 18 years. You've brought me more joy than anyone else." "Grandpa, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I need you to know that before I die." "I love you too, Grandpa." "Nathan, I need you to promise me something." "Anything. When they read my will, and when your family gets angry about my decisions, I need you to remember that I made those decisions out of love, not out of spite." "I'll remember, and I need you to use the money I'm leaving you to build something good with your life." "I will." "Promise me you won't let their anger make you feel guilty about receiving it." "I promise." "Good. Now you can wake them up." I went downstairs and quietly woke up Mom and Dad, telling them that Grandpa wanted to see them. They came upstairs immediately, and we all stood around his bed as his breathing became more and more labored. He died at 4:23 a.m., with Mom holding one hand and Dad holding the other, and me standing at the foot of the bed. His last words were, "Thank you," though he didn't specify who he was thanking or what he was thanking them for. Carol pronounced him dead and called the funeral home, and within an hour, people were coming to take his body away. The next week was a blur of funeral planning, obituary writing, and family members flying in from out of state. The funeral itself was well attended and respectful, with a lot of people sharing stories about Grandpa's kindness and generosity over the years. But underneath all the grief and mourning, I could sense the family's anticipation about the will reading. Everyone was trying to be respectful and not talk about money during the week of the funeral, but I could tell that everyone was thinking about it. When is the lawyer going to read the will? I heard Dad ask Mom. Mr. Coleman said he'd call us next week to schedule a meeting. Mom replied, I hope it doesn't take too long. We need to start making decisions about the house and the other properties. Robert, let's not talk about that right now. I'm not being greedy, Jennifer. I'm just trying to be practical. But he was being greedy, even if he didn't want to admit it. The will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. in Mr. Coleman's office downtown. The attendees were Dad, Aunt Lisa, Uncle Mark, Mom as Dad's spouse, and me. I was surprised that I was invited, since I had assumed that only the direct heirs would be included, but Mr. Coleman had specifically requested that I be there. Why does Nathan need to be there? Dad asked when Mr. Coleman called to schedule the meeting. Your father specifically requested that Nathan be present for the reading, Mr. Coleman replied. But he's not mentioned in the will, is he? We'll discuss everything at the meeting, Mr. Hayes. The morning of the will reading, I was more nervous than I had ever been in my life. I knew what was coming, but the rest of the family had no idea that their carefully laid plans were about to be destroyed. Mr. Coleman's office was in a downtown building that probably hadn't been updated since 1970. The conference room had wood paneling and old leather chairs and the kind of formal, intimidating atmosphere that lawyers seem to love. Dad, Aunt Lisa, and Uncle Mark were all dressed nicely and looked excited, like they were attending a graduation or an award ceremony. Mom looked nervous but hopeful. Before we begin, Mr. Coleman said, I want to explain that your father updated his will approximately 6 months ago. The document I'm about to read supersedes any previous versions you may be aware of. Updated it how? Aunt Lisa asked. We'll get to that. Let me read the document, and then we can discuss any questions you have. Mr. Coleman put on his reading glasses and opened a legal document that was several pages long. The last will and testament of William Robert Hayes. He began. The first part of the will was standard legal language about revoking previous wills and confirming that Grandpa was of sound mind when he wrote it. Then came the specific bequests. To my son Robert Hayes, I leave the sum of $50,000. Dad's face immediately showed confusion and disappointment. He had been expecting much more than $50,000. To my daughter Lisa Coleman, I leave the sum of $50,000. Aunt Lisa looked shocked. She started to say something, but Mr. Coleman held up his hand to indicate that he wasn't finished reading. To my son Mark Hayes, I leave the sum of $50,000. Uncle Mark looked confused, but not as disappointed as his siblings, probably because $50,000 was more money than he had ever had at one time. The remainder of my estate, including my house, my rental properties, my investment accounts, and all other assets, will be liquidated, and the proceeds will be distributed as follows. $2 million to the Community College Foundation to establish the William Hayes Scholarship Fund for students pursuing vocational training, $1 million to the Regional Food Bank, $500,000 to the American Cancer Society, and $1 million to my grandson, Nathan Robert Hayes. The room went completely silent for several seconds. Then everyone started talking at once. That can't be right, Dad said. There must be a mistake. Aunt Lisa said. Why is Nathan getting so much money? Uncle Mark asked. This doesn't make sense, Mom said. Mr. Coleman held up his hand again. There's more, he said, and continued reading. I have made these decisions after careful consideration of my relationships with my family members and my observations of their priorities and values over the past several years. To my children, I leave enough money to provide assistance without creating dependency. To the charitable organizations, I leave money that will be used to help people who are truly in need. To my grandson Nathan, I leave money because he has consistently shown that he values relationships over wealth, and I trust him to use this inheritance wisely and for good purposes. Mr. Coleman finished reading the will and set it down on the conference table. Are there any questions about the contents of the document? Yes, Dad said, his voice rising. I have a lot of questions. How is this legal? How can he leave almost everything to charity and to Nathan instead of to his own children? The will is entirely legal, Mr. Hayes. Your father had the right to distribute his assets however he chose. But this is ridiculous. Nathan is 18 years old. What does he need $1 million for? That was your father's decision to make. Can we contest this? Aunt Lisa asked. You can attempt to contest it, but I should warn you that your father anticipated that possibility. He included a clause stating that any beneficiary who contests the will forfeits their inheritance entirely. So if we fight this, we get nothing. Uncle Mark asked. That's correct. This is insane, Dad said. Nathan, did you know about this? Everyone turned to look at me, and I realized that this was the moment when I had to decide how much of the truth to tell them. Grandpa told me he had changed his will, but he didn't tell me the details. This was technically true, although it left out the fact that he had told me about my inheritance specifically. When did he tell you this? Aunt Lisa asked. When he was dying, during one of our conversations. Why didn't you tell us? Dad asked. Because he asked me not to. Nathan, this affects the whole family. You should have told us. Mom said. Why? So you could pressure him to change it back. So we could have a conversation about it like a family, Dad said. You mean so you could convince him to give you more money? That's not fair, Aunt Lisa said. Isn't it? You've all been planning how to spend his money for months. You had meetings in his dining room while he was dying upstairs, talking about tax implications and estate sales and who was going to get what. We were trying to be prepared, Dad said. You were treating him like he was already dead. Nathan, that's enough, Mom said. No, it's not enough. Grandpa heard you talking about his money like he wasn't even there. He knew that you were more interested in his will than in spending time with him. That's not true, Aunt Lisa said. We visited him all the time. You visited him because you wanted to stay in his good graces for inheritance purposes. I visited him because I wanted to spend time with him. You're being very hurtful, Nathan, Dad said. I'm being honest. And apparently Grandpa was being honest too when he decided who really cared about him. The meeting ended with a lot of anger and hurt feelings. Dad and Aunt Lisa were furious about receiving so much less money than they had expected. They were also furious that I was receiving so much more. Uncle Mark seemed less upset, probably because $50,000 was still a substantial amount of money for him. Can I ask you something, Nathan? He said as we were leaving Mr. Coleman's office. Sure. Are you going to share any of that money with the family? I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. Because, $1 million is a lot of money for an 18-year-old. It's a lot of money for anyone. Right. I just thought maybe you might want to help out your dad and Lisa since they were expecting more. They were expecting more, but they weren't entitled to more. I guess that's true. Mark, can I ask you something? Sure. Are you disappointed that you only got 50,000? Honestly, no. I mean, I would have been happy to get more, but 50,000 is more money than I've ever had. And I think your grandfather was probably right that I don't need a huge lump sum. What are you going to do with it? I'm going to use some of it to go back to school and learn a trade, maybe plumbing or electrical work, something that will give me a stable income. That sounds like a good plan. What about you? What are you going to do with $1 million? Finish college without worrying about student loans. Maybe go to graduate school. Maybe start a business someday. Your grandfather would be proud of that. I hope so. Over the next few weeks, the family dynamics became very strained. Dad and Aunt Lisa were not speaking to me, and they were barely speaking to each other because they were both angry about the inheritance situation. Mom was caught in the middle, trying to maintain relationships with everyone while also dealing with Dad's anger and disappointment. Nathan, I think you should consider sharing some of that money with your father, she said one evening when I was home for the weekend. Why? Because he's your father, and he was counting on that inheritance to help with our financial situation. Mom, what was Dad planning to do with the money? Pay off the mortgage, maybe get a new car, save some for retirement. Those are all nice things to have, but they're not necessities. Dad has a job, you have a job, and you have a house and cars that work fine. It's not about necessities, Nathan. It's about family. What about family? Families help each other. If you have resources that could make your father's life easier, shouldn't you want to share them? Did Dad help Grandpa when Grandpa was dying? What do you mean? I mean, Dad visited Grandpa twice a week for the last 6 months of his life. But he spent most of those visits asking about finances and talking about inheritance. He didn't help with Grandpa's medical care. He didn't help with household tasks. He didn't spend meaningful time just talking to him. Your father was busy with work. So was I, Mom. I was busy with college. But I still found time to actually spend time with Grandpa. That's different. You're young, and you don't have the same responsibilities. Mom, I stayed overnight with Grandpa multiple times during his last week of life. Dad never stayed overnight. I was there when he died because I wanted to be there, not because I felt obligated. I know you were close to Grandpa, and I think that's why he left me the money. Not because I'm young or because I don't have responsibilities, but because I cared about him as a person instead of as a source of inheritance. Nathan, I'm not saying you don't deserve the money. I'm just saying that sharing it with family would be a generous thing to do. Would it be generous? Or would it be enabling Dad's expectation that he's entitled to money he didn't earn? That's a harsh way to put it. It's an honest way to put it. The conversation with Mom helped me understand that the family's anger wasn't really about the money itself. It was about the fact that grandpas had exposed their true motivations for maintaining relationships with him. Dad and Aunt Lisa were angry because they felt like they had been deceived. They had assumed they were going to inherit substantial amounts of money, and they had made plans based on that assumption. But Grandpa had never actually promised them anything, and he had every right to distribute his wealth however he chose. They were also angry because the will had revealed that their relationships with Grandpa were transactional in nature. They had visited him and helped him because they expected to be rewarded financially, and when that reward didn't materialize, they felt cheated. But the reality was that they had cheated themselves out of genuine relationships with their father by focusing on his money instead of his companionship. I decided not to share my inheritance with Dad or Aunt Lisa, but I did give Uncle Mark an additional $25,000 to help him get started with his trade school plans. "Why are you giving me more money?" he asked when I handed him the check. "Because you were honest about your motivations, and because you have a solid plan for how to use it. But your dad and Lisa are going to be even more angry if they find out you gave me extra money. That's their problem, not yours. Nathan, I don't want to cause more family drama. You're not causing drama. Their unrealistic expectations and sense of entitlement are causing drama. What do you mean? I mean Dad and Lisa expected to inherit hundreds of thousands of dollars that they didn't earn and weren't promised. When that didn't happen, they got angry at me instead of accepting that Grandpa had the right to do whatever he wanted with his own money. But you're his grandson, not his son. Doesn't that seem unfair? Mark, let me ask you something. Over the past year, how much time did you spend with Grandpa just talking to him and keeping him company? I don't know, maybe a few hours a month. How much time did Dad spend with him? Probably about the same. I spent 3 or 4 hours a week with him, just hanging out and talking. I stayed overnight with him multiple times when he was sick. I was the person he wanted with him when he died. So you think the inheritance was based on time spent? I think the inheritance was based on the quality of the relationship. Dad and Lisa visited Grandpa because they felt obligated to, and because they wanted to stay in his good graces for inheritance purposes. I visited him because I enjoyed his company. And Grandpa could tell the difference. Of course he could tell the difference. Old people aren't stupid, Mark. They know when someone is spending time with them out of love versus out of obligation or expectation. That makes sense. So when Grandpa decided how to distribute his wealth, he gave it to people and organizations that he believed would use it well. He didn't give it to people who felt entitled to it. Do you think I earned my $50,000? I think you were honest with Grandpa about your situation and your needs, and he respected that honesty. I also think he believes you'll use the money responsibly. I'm going to try to. That's all anyone can do. I used my inheritance exactly the way Grandpa had hoped I would. I paid off my college expenses, so I graduated debt-free. I went to graduate school and got an MBA with a focus on nonprofit management. After graduation, I got a job with a foundation that provides educational scholarships to low-income students. 5 years later, I used part of my inheritance to start my own nonprofit organization focused on helping elderly people who are being financially exploited by family members. We provide legal assistance, financial counseling, and advocacy for seniors who are being taken advantage of by relatives who are more interested in their money than in their well-being. What made you decide to focus on elder financial abuse? A reporter asked me during an interview about the organization. Personal experience, I told her. I watched my own family treat my grandfather like a bank account instead of a human being, and I realized that this is probably happening in a lot of families. Can you tell me more about your personal experience? I shared the story of Grandpa's final months and the family's reaction to his will, although I didn't use anyone's real names. How did your family react when they found out about your inheritance? They were angry and hurt, and they felt like they had been deceived. But the reality was that they had deceived themselves by assuming they were entitled to money that was never promised to them. Do you have a relationship with your family now? I have a relationship with my Uncle Mark, who is honest about his situation and used his inheritance wisely. My relationship with my father and aunt is complicated. What do you mean by complicated? They're still angry about the inheritance, and they still believe that I should have shared it with them. They see my success as something that should belong to the whole family, rather than as something I earned through my relationship with my grandfather. How do you feel about that? I feel sad that they're missing out on relationships with me and with my children because they can't let go of their resentment about money. But I also feel like their reaction validates my grandfather's decision about how to distribute his wealth. What advice do you have for families who are dealing with inheritance issues? I think the most important thing is to separate relationships from money. If you're spending time with an elderly family member because you love them and want to support them. That's beautiful. If you're spending time with them because you're hoping to inherit their money, that's exploitation. And what advice do you have for elderly people who are concerned about how their families will react to their estate planning decisions? I think they should make decisions based on their own values and their own assessment of how their money will be used, not based on what their family members expect or want. And I think they should communicate with their families about their values and priorities, even if they don't reveal the specific details of their wills. Is there anything you wish you had done differently during your grandfather's final months? I wish I had confronted my family more directly about their behavior. I knew they were treating him poorly, but I was too young and too conflict-averse to speak up about it. What would you have said to them? I would have told them that their constant focus on his money was hurtful and disrespectful, and that they were missing out on the opportunity to have meaningful relationships with him during his final months. Do you think that would have changed anything? Maybe not, but at least he would have known that someone in the family was willing to stand up for him. Today, I'm 26 years old and the executive director of a nonprofit that has helped over 3,000 elderly people protect themselves from financial exploitation. We've recovered over $15 million in stolen assets and have prosecuted dozens of family members who were taking advantage of vulnerable seniors. Mom and I have rebuilt our relationship, and she now volunteers with my organization. She's become an advocate for elder rights and has spoken publicly about the importance of treating elderly family members with respect and dignity. "I'm proud of the work you're doing," she told me recently. "Your grandfather would be proud too. Do you think Dad will ever get over his anger about the inheritance?" I don't know. He's still bitter about it, and he still talks about how unfair it was. What does he say? He says that Grandpa was manipulated into changing his will and that you took advantage of being the favorite grandchild. Do you believe that? No. I think Grandpa made a thoughtful decision based on his observations of how different family members treated him and how they would likely use his money. Are you disappointed that you didn't inherit more money? Honestly, at first I had gotten used to the idea of paying off our mortgage and not worrying about money. But seeing what you've done with your inheritance and seeing how it's allowed you to help so many other people, I think Grandpa made the right decision. What about Dad? Do you think he would have used the money well? Your father is a good man, but he's not particularly ambitious or innovative. He probably would have paid off some bills and put the rest in savings. It wouldn't have been a bad use of the money, but it wouldn't have been a transformative use either. Do you think Grandpa was trying to teach the family a lesson? I think he was trying to teach the family that relationships matter more than money, and that money should be used to create positive change rather than just to make people more comfortable. Did the family learn the lesson? You did. Mark did. I did, eventually. Your father and Lisa. I'm not sure they've learned it yet. Uncle Mark used his inheritance to become a licensed electrician, and he now owns a small electrical contracting business. He's been sober for 8 years and has rebuilt relationships with his children. He sends me a Christmas card every year with updates on his family and his business. I think about your grandfather's advice a lot. He wrote in his most recent card. He told me that money is a tool for building something better, not just for buying things you want. I try to use my business to help people and to provide good jobs for other people who are trying to get back on their feet. Dad and Aunt Lisa are still angry about the inheritance, and our relationships remain strained. They see my success as proof that I stole money that should have belonged to the whole family, rather than as evidence that Grandpa made a wise decision about how to distribute his wealth. But that's their choice to make. I can't force them to understand Grandpa's reasoning or to accept his decisions. All I can do is use the opportunities he gave me to build something meaningful and to honor his memory by helping other people. The most important lesson I learned from Grandpa's death is that family relationships should be based on love and respect, not on financial expectations or inheritance planning. The people who treated him well during his life were the people he chose to reward after his death, and the people who treated him poorly discovered that their poor treatment had consequences. Money doesn't create love, but the way people behave around money often reveals how much love actually exists in their relationships. My grandfather was wise enough to understand this, and generous enough to use his wealth to teach his family about what really matters in life. Some of us learned the lesson. Others are still working on it. But the lesson was worth teaching, and I'm grateful that he trusted me to help carry it forward. My name is Nathan Hayes, and at 18, I learned that becoming an adult sometimes means watching your family reveal their true priorities. It means understanding that love and money are separate things, and that people who confuse the two often end up with neither. It means recognizing that the people who invest in relationships without expecting financial returns are the people who deserve to be invested in. And it means using whatever resources you have, whether inherited or earned, to create something meaningful rather than just to make your own life more comfortable. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money. Sometimes it's the wisdom to understand what money is actually for. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the knowledge that they are valued for who they are, not for what they might leave behind. If you're listening to this and you have elderly family members, please remember that they can tell the difference between people who care about them and people who care about their money. Spend time with them because you love them, not because you want to stay in their good graces for inheritance purposes. Listen to their stories, ask for their advice, include them in family activities, and treat them with the respect and dignity they deserve. And if you're someone who is being pressured by family members about your estate planning, remember that your money is yours to distribute however you choose. You don't owe anyone an inheritance, and you have the right to reward the people who have treated you well and to support causes that reflect your values. The people who truly love you will respect your decisions, even if they're disappointed by them. And the people who only love your money will reveal themselves through their reactions to your choices. Either way, you'll know who your real family is. And in the end, that's worth more than any amount of money.